We're holding on Daf Yud Ches Amid Aleph at the Mishnah.
Right.
At the Okay, so we're continuing on regarding the sequestering of the Kohen Gadol and what did he do during those 7 days? What was he preparing? So now we get into the part of the preparation. So says the Mishnah, they provided him 2 dayanim, 2 sages, 2 judges from the Supreme Court, from the Sanhedrin, okay, who were by far the most learned by definition of our people. So they gave over 2. The Kairin Lefanov, the Seder Hayoim, and they would read for him the Torah portions, specifically last week's parshas, Achrei Mos and Kedoshim, regarding, but mainly Achrei Mos, concerning the order of the day as to what takes place on Yom Kippur, the Avodah, the service of Yom Kippur, which we laid the last week in Achrei Mos Kedoshim. And they would say to him, Ishi Kohen Gadol, my master Kohen Gadol. So let's stop right there. They were very, very careful not to lord it over the Kohen Gadol, that they were the Rebbes and the Kohen Gadol was the Talmud. They started off by saying, Ishi, our master, my master Kohen Gadol. They clearly gave him the respect that was coming to his office, despite the fact that he may or may not have known much about the Avodah of the Yom Kippur, as we're about to see. Kara ato bepicha, read it with your own mouth. The idea being is we all know in chinuch, in education, it's not enough to teach. More importantly is that the children, or in this case the Talmud, can teach himself. That means after he teaches, he can say it over and can say it out. We used to say in yeshiva, if you're writing the shiur, if you're writing the lecture down as the Rebbe is talking, and you're just writing and writing and writing, and you can't do it succinctly, it means because you don't truly understand it. If it's taking you 5 pages to write, what should take you 2 pages to write, is because you don't have it succinctly clear in your head. And that's what the idea here is. After we teach it, you go back and reread it to make sure that you've got it understood. And they were very clearly about it. Shema shachachta, maybe you forgot some of the halachas, or shema lo lamadato, perhaps you never learned them. Now, there's 2 parts. Maybe you didn't learn, you checked out while we were teaching you. So while we were teaching you, you faded away, so maybe you didn't get it. The other part of maybe you didn't learn, there was a very sweet saying, maybe we're dealing with a Kohen Gadol Ama Oretz. A Kohen Gadol that just can't learn. And the answer is the Gemara is going to tackle this. Because in a very sweet way, the Mishnah is making reference to the second Beis Hamikdash and the second half of the second Beis Hamikdash when they started selling the Kahuna Gedolah in the times of the Hashmonaim kings. Okay, so this is a very subtle way of making that point. Shema loy lamadata, maybe you didn't learn. Erev Yom Kippurim Shachris, in the morning of Erev Yom Kippur, Meidian Oiseh B'Shar Mizrach, they stood him at the eastern gate of the Azara of the courtyard. U'mavirin lefonim parim ve'elim u'kevosim, and they led before him oxen, rams, and sheep, Kadeshe Makil Berogel Ba'avodah, so that he should recognize them and be familiar with the Yom Kippur service. Because each one of these animals, oxen, rams, and sheep, are used at various parts of the day. And the idea being not that he didn't recognize them, but he should get familiar that this animal will be used at this part of the Beis Hamikdash, and this animal will be used at this part of the Beis Hamikdash. And with this animal, I'm going to do this avodah. And in fact, the Gemara is going to ask the question in that case, how come it doesn't say goats? Because we all know that there were 2 Izim, right? One that was one that was given for Hashem and one that was sent Lazazel, the goat that was sent to Lazazel to be thrown down the mountain, as it were, to be stoned in place of Klal Yisrael. So, Gemara is going to ask that question. Kedei, says the Gemara, makiv v'rogel ba'avodah, so that he should recognize and be familiar with the Yom Kippur service, i.e., which animal fit which service. Says the Mishnah Vayta, Kol Shivas Yomim, all 7 days. Remember, the whole purpose of the 7 day really was to keep the Kohen Gadol Tahar, that he shouldn't have seminal emissions, etc., become tummy. Now, it's not a disaster if that happens during the first 6 days, because the next day he goes to the mikvah. He's already Torah. He just has to wait for the nighttime, the Hariv Shemesh, and then he's good to go. The problem is on the 7th day on Erev Pesach. What happens that night? The night of Yom Kippur, the actual night of Yom Kippur. And if he would fall asleep on the night of Yom Kippur, so in the morning, which is Yom Kippur morning, he would toivel in the mikvah, not as a bath, but as a toivel to become tar. The problem with that is you still require Hariv Shemesh. You still have to wait for the evening, and the evening is obviously after Yom Kippur, which would mean that he wouldn't be able to do the avodah. So how do we stop the problem of the 7th day? Kol Shivas Hayomim, all 7 days. We didn't withhold any food or drink. He was able to get anything that he wanted, as we're going to see. Erev Yom Kippurim, but on the eve of Yom Kippur, towards nightfall, that means towards Kol Nidre, toward the night of Kol Nidre. They didn't give him a lot to eat, even though there's a mitzvah to eat a lot on Erev Yom Kippur. As it got later in the day, they slowed it down. Today, why? Because eating brings on sleep, and they didn't want him sleeping the night of Yom Kippur for the obvious reasons. When you sleep, when things happen in your sleep. Very good. We are now on 1883, the Gemara. Okay, very good. That the Kohen Gadol might have forgotten some of the halachas. That's reasonable. Listen, we all learn, we forget things. Okay, that's why we ask him to read it over again. Ela Shema loy lamad, but it's a concern that he never learned the halachas. Do we ever appoint a Kohen Gadol who's an Ama Oretz, who doesn't know the basic halachas of being a Kohen Gadol? I mean, who are we appointing as the chief rabbi over here, the chief Kohen Gadol? And the Kohen who is exalted, HaGadol, who is greater above his brethren. Meaning, She'ehei Gadol Meyecha b'koyach, b'noi, b'chachma, u'ba'osher. The Kohen Gadol should be exalted over his fellow Kahanim in strength, beauty, wisdom, and wealth. And others say, in explanation of this, how do we know that if the Kohen Gadol is not rich, but he has all the other midos, and he's right to be Kohen Gadol, he just doesn't have money, that the other Kahanim go ahead and create a fund to make sure that he's richer than all of the rest of them. They donate to that until he has more money than the rest of them. Talmud Laima Kohen HaGadol Me'echav Gadleu Mishalechav. He's exalted through the possessions of his brothers. Because statement that the Kohen Gadol has to be the top of the line, including B'chachma, in wisdom. We're talking about what Chachma we're talking about? A Talmud Chacham. So what's going on over here? How do you say Rav Yosef Loikasha? The Bryson we just said, giving the rules that he has to be bigger, greater than his brothers, is talking about in the first base of Mikdash. Here we're talking, unfortunately, in the second base of English. The Omer Rabasi, Tarkebo Didonre Alayale Marta Bas Baitus Liana Malka. Marta, the daughter of Baitus, gave a tarka of gold dinorim to King Yanai as a bribe. Ad Ukme Yeshua ben Gamla Bekahane Rabrave, before he appointed Yeshua ben Gamla as a Kohen Gadol. In other words, Marta happened to have been a widow, and she got engaged, or she got married to Yeshua ben Gamla the Kohen. And then she took her money, her vast amount of money, and she bribed Yanai, who was a Hashmonai king, to make Yeshua ben Gamla Kohen Gadol. Now here's the funny part. Yeshua ben Gamla actually was a tzaddik. He was a great Kohen Gadol. So from one side, he was roy on his own to be Kohen Gadol. Nonetheless, as we all know, too often the road to hell is paved with good intentions. The good intention was to get him to be Kohen Gadol, but it opened the door to bribery for the Kahuna Gedolah. The other thing that the Mefarshim says that Yehuda ben Gamla was a great man, but there were greater still besides him. That even in his own generation, he wasn't the greatest. And that in fact, there should have been somebody else who should have been Kohen Gadol. So the problem actually started with him. Now, the rest of today's daf is going to leave this conversation. But I do believe that the next daf, I haven't prepared it yet, but I believe daf Yutes goes into very much what was going on in the second base of English. And so we'll get to it. That Gemara is definitely going to talk about this more. Erev Yom Kippurim Shachris, right? We were very careful. We brought him the animals. If you remember the animals that we brought him the Parim, Elam, Ukibosim, the ox and the rams and the sheep, so that he should be makir, which animals go to what avoid. So Zavti Gemara, Tano, Afasirin. They also brought him the goats. The goats. The two goats were chosen by a lottery. One became designated for the Chatas, whose blood was sprinkled inside the Kodesh. And the other one was designated for Azazel to be thrown down the mountain. So, Frank the Gemara, Vitana di Don, my Tama Loitana Sirim. Our Tana, why doesn't he mention the goats? Says the Gemara, since they come to atone for Aveira, Chol Shishtate, the Kohen Gadol might become Chalisha Das, might become despondent upon seeing them, recognizing that one of them is going to be thrown down La Zozel, as it were, taking the stoning on behalf of the nation. And the other one, you're going to sprinkle the blood of the Chatos on the Paraiches inside the Kodesh. So therefore, the Kohen Gadol is going to say, we're never going to get forgiven. That's it. How am I going to accomplish my tafkid, which is the most important thing, to daven like a bench and do the avodah in such a way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will forgive Klal Yisrael? So we don't bring him something that might bring him to depression. So pray the Gemara, if that's true, it comes to atone for sin. So says the Gemara, Par, regarding the Chatas Bull, since it comes to atone for his Averis, the Kohen Gadol's Averis, and the Averis of his brethren Kahanim, his brothers the Kahanim. If you remember at the time of the Musaf, when we read over the Avodah on Yom Kippur, we go by Kahanim, we do 3 different times. But Kahanim, when we do Shtachim, one of them is he asks for Mechila on himself, Yad Beis Arai, right, and the house of Arai. Then he goes asks for, first his own house, then the house of his brothers, and then the house of God's Klal Yisrael. So here we're talking about the chatos that are being brought with the par upward to atone for his own sin and for the sin of his brothers, the Kahanim. If among his brothers, the Kahanim, there's somebody that has something that needs correcting, that needs to make tshuva, the Kohen Gadol is aware of it, and he prevails on him to do tshuva. The Kohen Gadol is the head, obviously, of the Kahanim. So, as they like Rabbi Gibber has responsibility to know what's going on by everybody. So he would be mashpia on him to do tshuva. The Kule Yisrael or Yoda, obviously on all of Klal Yisrael, he can't know who committed the sins. Memela, he's much more despondent when he looks at the goats that are coming to atone for all of Klal Yisrael. Amar Ravina, this is what Ravina says, Hainu Damri Inchi Ibar Achose Viola Habe. If your sister's son is a policeman, your nephew is a policeman, don't pass him in the street. In other words, your nephew knows really what's going on in your private business, and he knows you're making money and all that, and he'll want to go ahead and become bigger in the government, and so he'll grab your money to pay the taxes. So, says the Gemara Vaita, Kol Shivas Yomim Loyhaya Moinim. During the entire 7 days, they did not withhold any food from him, only close to the night of Yom Kippur. Tanya, we learned, Rabbi Yehuda ben Nikaisa says, even on the morning of Erev Yom Kippur, they would give him foods containing fine flour and eggs, in order to loosen him up. 18A4. In other words, loosen the system, let him go to the bathroom Erev Yom Kippur so that he shouldn't need to use the bathroom on Yom Kippur itself, so that he will be able to do the avodah with no problem. Others explain just the opposite. This food leads to constipate him. And if it constipates him, just the opposite, it accomplishes the same thing. He can't go to the bathroom. So therefore, either way, the idea being was so that on Yom Kippur himself, when he's in the Beis Hamikdash doing the avodah, he shouldn't need to use the bathroom. Amalai, they said to Rabbi Yehuda ben the Kohen said, no way, they didn't give him that to eat. Kol shein gata mevi l'dei chimus. You'll certainly bring him into a state of heat, of arousal, because as Rashi explains, very interesting, because when you eat this stuff, it builds up the semen account. That's what Rashi over here on the page says. Explains it. Let me see where I can find the Rashi. 1, 2, 3, 4 lines from the bottom. 4 lines from the tree. Shall lidei chimus, the heat shall carry to a seminal emission. Shahasalosais va'abeitzim, fine flour and eggs. Merabim es hazera, increase the semen. So there you go. Okay, interesting, right? Now this is something. So now this is just as a point of reference. The Gemara does not ever, even though it's very tznius, does not ever shy away from the human condition. It's very, very cognizant of who we are as human beings. And that's why when you beg into these stuff, everybody knows the famous story, which we'll get to later, I don't know, in this Masechta, but in other Masechtas, which is mind-boggling unless you know the Jewish mind, that there were these Talmidim that hid underneath their Rebbe's bed so they could hear, at the very least, how their Rebbe had relations with their wife. And when the Rebbe finds out, the Rebbe goes, "What are you doing down there?" And the Talmud says, "Zui Torah v'tzarech lamadata." This too is Torah, and I need to learn how to do it. And you're my Rebbe. And the Gemara leaves it off. That's it. That is so quintessential a Jewish idea, that everything that's in the world has 2 purposes. It has a secular, mundane thing, but through the secular, you bring out the holiness. We take the physical to bring out the spiritual. To put this another way, just because we're here, we don't call it sex. We call it love. And there's a reason for that. The Torah HaKadosh uses that all the time. Because that's what the ideal is supposed to be. It's a physical act that in essence brings us to a spiritual high. That's the whole idea. The whole idea is to take from two and create one, which is i.e. to become one with the Rebbeinu Shlomo in the creation of the world, together with the one. That's the idea. They were one originally. Adam and Chava were one. Chava was on the back of Adam Rishon. There was the surgery. They were separated, and now you need to come back together. That's the idea behind it. But within that, as you'll see as we work our way through Shas, sometimes you'll be shocked at what they're discussing. And you wonder, this is Haggadah. This is what they were busy with? The answer is they understood that the human condition was as much Torah as anything else is Torah. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu created us this way, then there's something to be learned. There's something to be learned about it in the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Further, says the Gemara Vayta, Tanya, Sumchis Oma Mishum Remeir, Sumchis said in the name of Remeir, Ei Machilin Oisei Loi Abi, V'amri Loi Ababi, V'yesham Av Loi Yayin Lovon, not white wine. What does this all mean? Loi Abi, Loi Esrik, Loi Beitzim, Loi Yayin Yoshon. They didn't feed him esrog, eggs, or yayin yoshin again, not to create a state of heat, of arousal. Ba'amri law, loy ababi, loy esrog, loy beitzim, loy basa shumen, not fatty meat, loy yayin yoshin. V'yeshayim af loy yayin lava, not white wine. V'bnei sheyayin lavan, maybe it's adon b'dei tuma, because white wine brings a person to contamination through seminal emissions. Tanu Rabbanan. Zov, regarding a Zov, someone who saw, as we know, an emission, we attribute that he had the seminal emission to the eating and food in excess. And that's any type of food can bring a discharge of eating too much. You're gluttonous, it leads to other things. Elazar ben Pinchas Ayman Mishum Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Ein Machilin Oisei Loi Chagbi. That means now that he's Tamei, Azav Gedola has to wait 7 clean days. Right? We all know this. This is where the 7 clean days come. So during those 7 clean days, we do not feed it Chabi, V'loi Gabam, V'loi Kol Devarim HaMevin L'dei Tumah, nor anything that brings him back to Tumah. Loi chakbi, that means loi chalab, loi gavina, loi beitza, loi yayin. Not milk, cheese, eggs, or wine. Loi gabam, mi shegirsim es pul, ubasa, shumen, urmeruyos. That means we do not feed him the juice of pounded beans, fatty meats, or fish fats. The same idea. The loi called the bottom of the tumah le'asuyim. What's that coming to include? It's coming to include what the Chazal taught. 5 things brings a person to Tumah through a seminal discharge. Hashum, garlic. We're now on Amid Beis. Yudches Amid Beis. V'ashilachim. V'chalak logos. V'beitzim v'hagargir. Cress, purslane, eggs, and rocket. Rocket is actually arugula. How do I know that it's arugula? Because I Googled it yesterday. I asked Rabbi Google, what is the vegetable of rocket? And up it came. It's our good old arugula. Fine. Okay. Never knew that until yesterday, actually. Okay. So there we go.
That's why I always joke around. My daughter uses Dr. Google. That's a doctor. Yeah, every time she has something wrong, she Googles it. So she thinks she's consulting with a doctor.
Right, and I call it Rabbi Google. So for example, I'll give you an example. I was looking, we're looking at the Hilton, right around the corner from you. I needed to know about the Arif. I looked up Rabbi Google. It looks like the Arif is not there. It looks like it ends right on our border on the Boca Road.
That's a little bit of a problem.
The sidewalk of Glen. Yeah, I don't think that's in the Arif. So I have to figure it out.
I did speak yesterday about the shul for the luncheon. I think it's possible. We're working on it.
All right, listen, I'm looking for, possibilities. That's all I can say.
I got it.
Now, yeah, listen, I really wish the club wasn't being so, I don't want to use a word, but you know what I'm talking about. They're being ridiculous.
I think they don't.
I don't want to get stuck in the middle of learning.
I don't think they understand. I had a meeting yesterday with Carla and Jennifer about the golf tournament.
I think you're right. I think that's what it is.
And they're dense. And I explained to them. Yeah. And I went through it. And I said, listen, if we have to, we can take some of the stuff out of the menu. We don't need to have, this is not like a banquet. It has to make sense financially. And they're working on it.
Right. All right. But it's what they don't realize in their obtuseness, they're going to shoot the golden goose. I want to give them money, but I'm not going to give them money. They're going to drive me crazy. Listen, I can make the whole thing I got to tell you, I can make the whole Shabbos in the hotel for 1/3 of the money. It's amazing. And then Matzah Shabbos regardless, I'm making a malava malka in lax and bagel. So this way I can get everybody come Matzah Shabbos. That's right before the fast. The fast starts Sunday morning, so it's the last Sheva Brachas, and I'll do it in lax and bagel. So if it works out that way, everybody will come Saturday night. We'll have a beautiful.
And it's very nice.
And that will be very nice, and everybody can come relax. We'll do it 45 minutes, an hour after Shabbos. You come in and you come out. It's just a nice, very
nice. I agree.
I think it'll work out as in everything in life. You don't get too hung up. Anyways, let's go further. So, having talked about the rockets, let's keep going. The pasuk says like this: "V'yetzei echad el asada lelaket oiros," and one of them went out into the field to gather oiros. Okay, this is in Malachim 2. Tanim Mishmei Rameir. Zeh gargir. This is rocket. Amar Rav Yochanan lama nikra shemon oiros. Why is rocket? It means arugula called oiros. Oiros also means lights. Or lights. Because they light up the eyes. Amar Rav Huna, if somebody finds rocket, finds arugula, if he can eat it, he should eat it. If not, he should pass it over his eyes. Amar Papa, Gargira Matsrana. This applies to wild rocket, essentially growing at the boundaries of the field, meaning that its essence, its nutrients, aren't being sucked away by other produce within the field. It's completely filled up with its own juice. Amar Gidel Amarav, Achsanai Loyekal Beitim, an overnight guest, the person who's guesting in somebody else's house, should not eat eggs because he might get aroused. And he shouldn't sleep on the host's garment because either the host is going to look down on him if he does the laundry and sees something, or it's just going to be very difficult. That's all. Rav, listen to this. Charlie, you're going to love this. Rav, ki miklal darshish machris. Rav, whenever he visited Darshish, would announce, "My haveli Yoma, who's willing to marry me for the few days that I'm here in Darshish?" Meaning, who's willing to marry me, live with me for the week that I'm here in Darshish, and then get divorced the week when I leave. Rab Nachman bar Makla l'shchansiv machris, when he would visit Shachenet machris, would announce, "Man aveli, who wants to marry me for the few days that I'm here?"
I love that.
And then I'll divorce. Yeah, I know you would love it. So, this prefaces what I told you before. Tanya, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, Omer, Lo Yisa Adam Isha b'Medina Zu v'Yelech v'Yisa Isha b'Medina Sacheres. A person should not marry one woman in this country and then go and marry another woman in another country. No, don't be a sailor. Don't have a wife in each port. Why? Shema is because maybe the children,
which happens,
will eventually meet. They'll meet.
It does?
Meet each other. It does happen. It does happen.
Terrible, yeah.
And what's going to happen? And the result will be that a brother will marry a sister. And the world will get filled up with illegitimacy. And that the land became filled with depravity. So the problem here is not that you're going to have a wife in every port. It's that the kids that come out of it might end up meeting, and, that's it. Amri, they said, Rabbanon Kola Islahu. The Rabbanon are famous. So therefore, when they did this, when they went to these towns and said, who will marry us for a week? Right? So if they have kids from these, don't worry about it. Everybody will know these are the children of Rav or Rav Nachman. And so they're not going to end up marrying their siblings. If marriage was proposed to a woman and she accepted, she first has to observe 7 clean days before she can be with her new husband. Right? That's even our college today. Right? Go to the mikvah before. So, how could they marry these women when they first got to these towns? Very good question. Says the Gemara, Rabbanan oidoi having meduyalu. The Rabbanan would inform the women. They would get a telegraph ahead of time that they're coming. They would send a messenger, a WhatsApp message in advance to publicize the marriage proposal. Whoever accepted it, made sure she had 7 clean days. The Iba Yisema, Charlie, I hope your wife is not listening to this. The Iba Yisema, Yehuda Yahavi Miyachtilahu. Chazal would merely live privately with their new wives, but would not engage in marital relations. So in other words, they didn't require the 7 days beforehand because they weren't going to sleep with them. But so then what does it accomplish? Right? If the whole idea is that it should make sure that you don't have a seminal emission, that you have relations legally, right? It says the fish ain't a diamond mishish like paspasaloi, the mish ain't loy paspasaloi. Because there's no comparison between one who has bread in his basket and one who has no bread in his basket. Where is this? It's on Yom Kippur. The kohen who took the goat to Har Azazel would have to walk all the way to Har Azazel. He was allowed to eat because of Suffolk Sakonis Nefashis. His life was in danger. So they would prepare for him along the way food drops, known as haspisaloi, food in a basket. The Gemara later is going to say that no kohen ever actually ate from the bread. No kohen actually broke his fast on Yom Kippur when he went to Azazel with the goat. But the Gemara says, how is that possible? How did they find the strength? It's something about human psychology. If you know you could eat and you know you have the food, you don't have such a Yetzer Hara to eat. It's when you don't have the food and you don't have the food available to you that then, I'm chalishing, I gotta have. When you have, you don't chalish as much. That is a very human reality. It's counterintuitive, but in fact, as we all know, it's true. Yud Ches Amid Beis, the last one, 18b2. Before we begin, I just want to reiterate what we just learned. everything is Torah. That's the point. Everything is Torah. The Gemara we just learned sounds a little funny. There's also other issues. Tosfos is big and says, what do you mean that they didn't sequester themselves 7 days? They're only going to live together. They're not going to marry. That only means Erisin and not Kedushin. That's only like a betrothal, but not actual Kedushin. Then you have a problem of Yichud. What do you do with Yichud? So Tosfos explains, we're not dealing with a Bachar, a single guy who's now getting married for the first time. We're talking about a second marriage, where the blood isn't so hot. So it's not such a problem. The big Tosfos on the side here is very busy with this whole story, what's going on. But the point here is, again, it goes back to what I was telling you before. They announced this. We're talking about Rav and Rav Nachman. And everybody took it as a matter of course. Because Rabbanon Kala Islay, the Rabbanon are famous and everybody knows what they're doing. They were our superstars. And then people didn't look at this funny. People understood that what they were doing was for spiritual reasons. So even though it looked funny on the outside, the people understood that on the inside we're dealing with greatness and holiness, and for that, and to achieve that, sometimes you have to check your dignity at the door and do what you feel is right. And now we're up to 18b2, the Mishnah. We're just going to do the Mishnah, and that's where we're going to stop, and we'll be on the daf for tomorrow. Gemara says as follows: Misarua ziknei bezdin leziknei kahuna. The sages of the court, that means the members of the Sanhedrin, put him in the care of the Chachamim of the Kahanim. V'alehu beis Avtinas, and they would take him up to the Avtinas family chamber. Avtinas was the family famous for making the ketores, for making the incest, which was a huge deal, as we're about to discuss, in the Beis HaMikdash on Yom Kippur. We're going to see, it's going to involve the toughest thing. If you take a look at number 11 in the Art Scroll, okay? I'll start reading it so we do it quickly. After studying with the Kohen Gadol the passages of Yom Kippur, they would bring him to the sages of the Kahanim, who were to teach him how to perform chafina, filling the hands with the ketores on Yom Kippur. The Torah requires the Kohen Gadol to place 2 handfuls of ketores on coals while inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim. He would carry a shovel full of coals and a ladle containing the correct measure of ketores into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, put the shovel down, and pour the contents of the ladle into the cupped hands without spilling anything or putting the ladle down. To accomplish this, and this is what I wanted to talk about, he had to grip the rim of the ladle with his teeth or his fingertips, tilt the ladle with his thumbs, and carefully empty the contents into his cupped hands. The Gemara later on Memtes Samid Beis will describe this as one of the most difficult of all of the avodas of the Beis HaMikdash. Because obviously in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies, he could not place it down on the floor. It was not coveted. It was not honorable. So he had to do this using his teeth, his fingernails. It was very odd, and it was Avtinas who taught it. Now, the Mishnah goes further. And the Mishnah says, Va'amru lai, and they said to him, Ishi Kohen Gadol, my master the Kohen Gadol, Honor Shaluchei Bezdin. We are the messengers of the court. You are our agent and the agent of the court, because you represent us in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Mashpiyan anu alecha b'mi sheshichen shemai b'bayiseh. We charge you with an oath by him who domiciles his name in this house. This is the base Hashem, the house of Hashem. That you will not change anything of all that we've told you. Because obviously, who is with the Kohen Gadol Lifnayu Lifnim? Who is with the Kohen Gadol in the Kodesh HaKadoshim? Nobody. So nobody really knows what the Kohen Gadol is doing. More importantly, the Tzedaikim held that in fact you have to prepare the Getoiris already on the coals on the outside in the Heichal, and then you carry the completed product into the Kodesh HaKadoshim and brought it there. We do not do it that way. We make this very difficult thing of carrying the incest in the hand and somehow holding the ladle as well with coals and somehow doing it all on the inside. So that's what they were talking. Don't follow the tzedakah. And look what the Mishnah says in very poetic words. He would turn aside and weep. And they would turn aside and weep. And the Gemara tomorrow is going to spend quite a bit of time discussing what exactly this is all about. If the Kohen Gadol was a Chacham, he would lecture, he would give shiurim on the Avodah coming up in the Yom Kippur. But if he wasn't, he was not a Talmid Chacham, but he was learned enough so that he would understand the shir. He could listen to a shir and understand it. They would lecture to him. And if he was accustomed to read, he would read. And if not, they would read to him. But what would they read before him? The idea being is, again, they needed to keep him awake the night of Kol Nidrei so that he wouldn't fall asleep and Chas V'Shalom become Tamei. Right? So how did they do it? They read to him, or he read for himself. And what do we say? They read from him from Eoiv, Be'ezra, Divrei Yomim. Again, these were interesting topics and also topics that would Messiah him to tshuva, that would also be a way of inspiring him to do tshuva. Zechariah ben Kevuta Loime. Zechariah ben Kevuta says, Pa'omim Harbor many times. Karisi, I read from him Lefonim to the Kohen Gadol on the night of Yom Kippur, Daniel from Daniel. And the idea of this, of course, is not specifically Daniel, which is not Eoiv, Ezra, or Divrei Hayomim. The idea is any Sefer Kodesh, any book from the Holy Scripture, from Tanakh, would be good to read to the Kohen. It's okay to Kohen Gadol. Very good. We are now on Yud Tes Amud Aleph.